Today we're going to explore the design, construction and performance of fibre-reinforced polymer in raised nesting platforms and the impact these platforms are having on South Australian osprey numbers. Good morning and welcome to our webinar on osprey nesting platforms. I'm Kelly Stewart, Marketing Manager at WagnersCFT, and I'm here with today's guest speakers, Ian Falkenberg from Friends of Osprey, Rick Hawthorne from Southern Yorke Peninsula Landcare Group, and Janet Moore from Northern and Yorke Landscape Board. Ian is chairperson of BirdLife Australia's Glue Pot Reserve Management Committee, state representative of BirdLife Australia's Raptor Group, coordinator of the recovery project for Eastern Osprey in South Australia, and an active member of the recovery team for osprey and white-bellied sea eagles. Meanwhile, Rick is a member of South Australia's Yorke Peninsula Landcare Group, and for a number of years this group has conducted migratory bird counts, identifying a decline in osprey numbers, which ultimately instigated the recovery and conservation plan for southeast osprey on Yorke Peninsula in conjunction with local and state government departments, community groups, bird organisations and schools. And Janet is the Jul de Wawa Baja project manager with the Northern and Yorke Landscape Board, which is an organisation dedicated to the sustainable management of South Australia's landscapes. Funding was provided through this organisation for the installation of 4 artificial nesting platforms as part of the Osprey Recovery Program on Yorke Peninsula. Finally, we're also joined by Wagner's CFT Project Manager, Daniel Allen, who will be facilitating the Q&A session of today's webinar, and Wagner's Marketing Officer, Georgia Lance, who will be telling us a little bit about some projects Wagner's CFT is currently undertaking with regards to osprey nesting platforms, and also she'll tell us a little bit about our environmental product declaration as well. So welcome, Ian, Rick, Janet, Daniel and Georgia. Before we get started, just a few webinar protocols. We are recording today's event and we'll make the recording public via the Wagner's CFT YouTube channel. You can ask a question anytime you like during the webinar via the chat bubble at the top of the screen. However, we will hold your questions over to the end of the webinar for the Q&A session. And for anybody having difficulty accessing that chat facility, feel free to send your questions directly via SMS to my mobile phone. I've just popped my number in that chat facility for you now. All right, well, that's it with the introductions. Let's dive in. I'm going to hand over first to Ian Falkenberg.
Thank you for that. Just by way of background information for the Endangered Osprey Project, the osprey population in South Australia is quite disjunct from the main species distribution in Australia, which effectively makes it quite unique in terms of its population status. It's really precariously balanced ecologically at the extreme south of eastern edge of its breeding range. I guess how we know that the birds are declining in 2008 2010, a survey showed around 58 pairs of ospreys in South Australia. A subsequent population survey in 2015, 2017 revealed a significant 26% decline with only 43 pairs surveyed. So all breeding sites on Yorke Peninsula at that time had abandoned apart from one, and the population was in dire straits of collapsing with those sort of declines. Few raptors, including ospreys, will tolerate human encroachment from above the nest, and effectively it's a loss of key habitat, human disturbance that has caused the population to decline as far as we know it at the moment. As a result of those declines, the South Australian Recovery Plan for Eastern Ospreys and White-bellied Sea Eagles were developed, and of course the artificial nest platforms, which are a vital and proven form of threat mitigation in areas where limited natural nest sites exist and where food is plentiful, was implemented. The project effectively kicked off in 2019 with the Southern Yorke Peninsula Landcare group initiating the development of a recovery plan, and I guess effectively that developed some specific specifications around what was needed to kick off the population itself with artificial nest platforms. It's probably a little bit too early to say conclusively the population is on the road to recovery. However, the indications at this stage, at least from the 2024 breeding season, are extremely positive, and talk a little bit about the results of that shortly. As I mentioned, the project kicked off in 2019. I guess there was a fair bit of planning work to go into the establishment of these platforms. We needed development approval. Planning applications were submitted to council, to respective government departments, of which there were 6. And so the planning process effectively took around about 6 to 9 months for each of the platforms, and that in itself, as you can appreciate, was a fair amount of work to get that working through. The composite fibre technology material was selected for the tower platforms due to its strength, structural integrity, lower cost, and ease of fabrication. And this is a very important one because initially the engineers developed a platform in steel, which was very expensive, needed specialist people to build them, and also the longevity of steel in a marine environment was questionable as well. And hence, I guess, looking at other materials, composite fibre was certainly one that ticked all boxes in terms of its durability, strength, lower cost, and longevity in a marine environment. So how would we pull that together? Talked to a number of organisations, community men's sheds around the state, and of course the Ardrossan men's shed were the ones that were willing to give it a go and to trial the production, I guess, and fabrication of one of the platforms. That's all history now. The group have built around about 16 platforms total in South Australia, and we've got about 18 platforms total around the coast of South Australia, and as you can appreciate, most of those have been fabricated by the Ardrossan men's shed. The partners, I guess, that have provided funding here, Rick will talk about the Landcare group, but Friends of Osprey, BirdLife Australia, Birds SA, a number of foundations, private donors, and government landscape boards have all contributed significantly to making this project happen. And I won't go into that in too much detail here because Janet, I think, will talk more about that later. In terms of success stories, just to give you a perspective, I guess, of how this is rolled out in last breeding season, 2024, 10 ospreys fledged from 4 artificial nest platforms on Yorke Peninsula. As I mentioned before, 10 years ago, there was only 1 active nest on Yorke Peninsula. Now we've got 4 artificial platforms producing young, and a 5th platform had birds present on them, although they didn't breed. So that's an incredible improvement on what we saw around 10 years ago. Of the 4 productive osprey nests, 2 produced 3 young and 2 produced 2 young each. And 2 natural nests on Yorke Peninsula failed to produce young. And we think that predation by particularly foxes may have implications there. And as you can appreciate, all these artificial nest platforms, given that they're elevated 6.5 metres above the ground, give the birds an incredible amount of protection from predation. and human disturbance. So it's a key aspect of allowing these birds to breed in safety, free of interference from things below the nest. A total of 3 Osprey young fledged from 2 artificial nest platforms on Yorke Peninsula in 2024. And as I mentioned, the indications from last season is extremely positive, and probably without would have far exceeded our expectations. To further give you an indication of the successes, the Price Osprey nest, which was installed in 2021, produced young almost immediately that season. Gleason's Landing Osprey nest again is another one. We put a platform up in 2022, and this was the first breeding of this successful breeding of this pair of ospreys in 10 years. Basically, human disturbance and predation was the main reason there. Another really important outcome of the project, Osprey nest platform installed at Point Davenport in 2022. No ospreys were previously recorded breeding at this site, and within a few days of installation, a pair of ospreys moved in. 2022, the first year, they laid 3 eggs, although the eggs didn't hatch, and that's not unusual for a first breeding. But in 2023, they produced 2 young, and last year they produced 3 young, which again is an outstanding result. And finally, I guess the another outstanding outcome in 2023, the Kabowie Osprey nest platform was installed in 2023, and within 4 hours of the installation, a pair of ospreys were observed refurbishing the nest. Fast track to 2024, 4 young were produced at this nest, and although only 3 young fledged, these were the heaviest birds that we've actually recorded in an osprey nest since the project commenced. So fantastic result, and I think it proves without doubt the project has been extremely successful. And I should mention too, the Kabowie nest, the birds used to nest on a telecommunications tower a couple of kilometres away from where the nest is currently located. And again, most years these birds would fail to raise young. They'd often go and they'd often commence breeding. They'd sometimes lay eggs, and sometimes the eggs would hatch, but the birds would very rarely ever get young off the nest. And there's some good reasons for that, which I won't go in today. But anyway, the Kabowie nest is now the birds are able to nest in reasonable safety with good production. The next slide, please. The project certainly couldn't be achieved without the input of communities. And as you're looking at the map in front of you, there's 18 platforms around the coast of South Australia now. Another 2 platforms to go in this season, and 6 of those platforms are on Yorke Peninsula at the moment. And as you can see on Eyre Peninsula, we've got a good selection of platforms around parts of the coast. There are some gaps there, which hopefully we can move to get platforms in some of those key areas in the next few years. But anyway, it's a good result, and we're certainly seeing a good response from the population accordingly. Next slide. The impact of the platforms on populations, on the bird population. The slide you're looking at the moment is great support from organisations like the oyster farmers in most of the coastal areas, and some platforms established at Smoky Bay and Streaky Bay, Coffin Bay over the last couple of years have had tremendous input from these organisations to try and help the ospreys succeed in breeding. great efforts gone into selecting the sites where these platforms are to be put. The success rate's much improved over water, and hence the reason that most of them are put into shallow marine environments where there's less disturbance, away from predation, and away from developments such as walking trails and housing developments and so forth. I should also mention too that the artificial platforms have been extremely successful overseas, and largely we've taken some of the techniques that have been used in other countries and applied them to a South Australian situation, looking at our rather flat, featureless landscape here. We don't have high trees, and of course these platforms have been adapted to suit South Australia's landscape. I think more platforms are planned for 2025, as I mentioned. 2 more this coming next couple of months, but again, we'd be hoping for a pretty successful year this year as well. So, and on that note, perhaps I could hand back to you, Kelly.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that presentation and insight into the amazing work that's going on down there in South Australia. I think we're going to go to Rick Hawthorne now. Rick, if you want to pull up your presentation and get ready. Rick is going to tell us a bit more about the community efforts that go in at right around Australia or through the South Australian Yorke Peninsula Landcare Group. And, you know, some of the work that they do to help, you know, reverse the decline in these osprey numbers. All right, Rick, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. As they said, my name is Rick Hawthorne from the Southern Yorke Peninsula Landcare Group on Yorke Peninsula, South Australia. I'm just going to give a bit of a background to the development of the program. This program was instigated by the late Kent Trelaw, who was a farmer at Minleton on Yorke Peninsula, and he was held in very high regard by the birding fraternity of South Australia. Kent had been keen on birds since he was a small child, and his knowledge and expertise are second to none. In 2017, Kent was president of the SYP Landcare Group, and he identified a decline in the osprey breeding population on Yorke Peninsula. There were a few active nests, but no successful breeding had happened from them, due mainly to things like human disturbance, foxes, cats, gulls, and storm damage. In 2018, Kent received word that an osprey was building a nest on a navigation beacon in Wills Creek, which is near Price on Yorke Peninsula. It's a tidal mangrove creek, and as a result, fishermen were tying their boats up to this navigation beacon and causing a risk of disturbance. But it was too late at that stage to do anything about it. There was unsuccessful breeding taking place, but after the breeding season was over, Kent constructed an artificial nests platform using a forklift pallet and a bread crate, as you can see there in the slide. With some help from the rest of us, he positioned it in a tall mangrove tree nearby to the navigation beacon. And the shifting was next with the nesting material from the navigation beacon to the new platform. So then it was just a matter of waiting to see whether it was being successful. In the meantime, Kent and SYP Landcare Group organised a meeting to discuss an artificial platform plan. Contact was made with bird organisations, Department of Environmental and Water, and all agreed of the need to do something to formulate a program. In 2019, there was a successful breeding program. The mangrove tree nest produced 3 young, but unfortunately at the same time, Kent became seriously ill. In 2020, Grant applications were successful, and we were able to appoint a project manager. And of this, of course, was Ian Falkenberg. This was a brilliant appointment, as not only did Ian have magnificent project management skills, he was also a raptor expert. So the project team was formed, and members of included from the Department of Environment and Water, Northern Yorke Landscape Board, Yorke Peninsula Council, National Parks and Wildlife Service, Coastal Protection Unit, and SYP Landcare Group. And Kent was appointed chairman. And as you can see, the recovery and conservation plan for the southeastern or the eastern Osprey on Yorke Peninsula, South Australia, was formulated. And platform designs and construction ideas were agreed upon. By now, the project was well underway. But in July 2020, Kent lost his battle and passed away, and the team was devastated, but the show had to go on. Further successful grants were made and community engagement began with progress associations, men's sheds and local government. 2021, there was the Gawler platform, the Point Gawler platform was installed at the International Bird Sanctuary. A platform was installed at Wills Creek. This was a bittersweet moment for the group because Kent wasn't able to be there, obviously, to see the results of his hard work. The two Ospreys were working the Gleeson's Landing nest, which was on a limestone stack, so that delayed the installation of a platform there. In November 2021, the Wills Creek price outcome was successful with 4 eggs and 3 young. And then in 2022, the Gleeson's Landing nesting attempt failed on the limestone stack, so no young were produced. So now it was clear to install the platform. Platforms were then installed at Gleeson's Landing, Sheoak Flat, Point Devonport, etc. In 2023, the Kabowie platform installation was taken place, and Ian filled us in on what happened there. 2024, 2 platforms were proposed for the Point Pearce Aboriginal lands and also the Clinton Conservation Park near Port Wakefield. And 2025, we had a nest building program at the Point Pearce Aboriginal School where 6 nests were produced to go on platforms, 1 in the Aboriginal lands at Point Pearce and another one at the Port Wakefield Conservation Park. And the installation hopefully will take place in June. Moving on to the second part of my presentation, is the project successful because of the community has ownership of it? And the short answer to that is absolutely. In the early days of the project, partnerships were formed with government departments, etc., which I've listed before. We had consultations with organisations like Bird SA, SA Ornithological Society, BirdLife Australia, Friends of Osprey, the Narunga Aboriginal Community and Aboriginal Lands Trust, the Yorke Peninsula Council, the District Council of Barunga West. Community consultation was next, and that began with the progress associations of towns such as Price, Port Clinton, Ardrossan, Corny Point, Port Broughton, Edithburgh, Kabowie, Sheoak Flat, also the Formby Bay Environmental Action Group, and also commercial fishing groups. But I guess the biggest one was with the Ardrossan Community and Men's Shed Group, who took on the magnificent job of producing these platforms with their high level of expertise, led very ably by Kevin Betterman. The unification of interested community and volunteer groups, along with government agencies, worked together to ensure the project achieves success. So cooperative partnerships were a positive way of bringing the community together to work towards improving quality environmental outcomes. Interest in the project was spreading. There were media reports, TV releases, radio interviews, newspaper and magazine articles, local and state. Landscape SA had a publication, Yorke, which included an article and a video. Pamphlets and posters were distributed to caravan parks and tourist information centres and national parks. And there was a lot of community monitoring of platforms in which the results were posted on social media. The Friends of Osprey group were formed, which had something like 47,000 Facebook members. Air Peninsula was also interested in developing their program for platform installations. We had international interest from Roy Dennis, who was a renowned Osprey expert from Scotland, who visited South Australia as a guest of Friends of Osprey to learn about our program. And he gave talks in Adelaide, Kabowie and Port Lincoln, which were also fundraisers for Friends of Osprey. A major one was with the Yorktown Area School and the Point Pearce Central York schools, who were building the platform. There's 12 in total were produced by the two schools, with much interest, excitement, and more importantly, ownership. A local farmer even offered finance to locate one of the platforms on his farm, which was adjoining the sea, and contact from other local towns on Yorke Peninsula where there were Osprey sightings proved to be successful. The Price Progress Association created a magnificent park which was dedicated to the Osprey and included murals and information columns. Without the interest, support and contributions from all of the community groups, organisations, government departments, local, state and federal, bird groups, etc., this project would not have developed into the success it has become. I'd like to conclude by reading two relevant quotes to finish it off. First one's from an article in Bird's essay publication, The Birder. This project demonstrates the importance of community involvement in local actions. And secondly, from Minister Susan Close, who is the South Australian Minister for Climate, Environment and Water. This was in July 2022. As South Australia's Minister for Climate, Environment and Water, and someone with a long-held passion for seabirds, I am pleased to lend my support to the conservation and recovery of these iconic species. The successful conservation and recovery of the eastern osprey and the white-bellied sea eagle in South Australia will require the support and assistance of enthusiasts, local communities, landscape boards, First Nation communities, local government, and the tourism and fishing industries. There are a number of actions and projects underway across South Australia, and the recovery plan provides a framework for further community-led recovery of coastal raptors in this state. I thank the many people who have contributed to its development. Thank you for that, and I'll hand back to Ian.
Thanks for that, Rick. Fantastic insight into the project from a community perspective, and vitally important without doubt. Kelly, I'm just wondering whether Janet would want to link in now?
Absolutely. Janet, I'm just going to pull up your slides.
Thank you.
We should be able to see those now.
Fabulous. So why is the government investing in this program? The government's invest in threatened species protection and recovery efforts across Australia. And in South Australia, osprey populations have experienced a significant and steady decline, as Ian explained, and they've been classed as endangered in South Australia since 2008. In response to the decline in population, an osprey and white-bellied sea eagle recovery plan was published in 2022 by the South Australia's Department for Environment and Water. This plan provides a blueprint for the recovery of both species, focusing on identifying the greatest threats to the species, how best to manage them to maintain current breeding population, and where additional targeted actions like artificial nesting platforms can increase breeding success. In South Australia, there are 8 regional landscape boards and a Green Adelaide board that covers the City of Adelaide. These boards work with partner agencies and the community to deliver natural resource management programs across the state. Each landscape board has their own regional priorities and focus areas. The Osprey Recovery Program aligns closely with our communities and biodiversity priorities and the focus areas that sit underneath them. And so the Northern and Yorke Landscape Board has been supporting the Osprey Recovery Program on Yorke Peninsula since its inception and that very first bread crate platform back in Price. Next slide. Thank you. Over the last 3 years, the Northern and Yorke Landscape Board has been able to provide financial support to the Landcare Group for the installation of 4 platforms through our Jildawawa Budget project. Jildawawa Budget is a Narungga term meaning resilient coast. The Jildawawa Budget project aims to strengthen our coastal ecosystems on Yorke Peninsula to better withstand the threats of climate change, pest, plants and animals, increase vehicle-based recreation and ensuring that First Nations people are well positioned to shape and participate in the project. The project aims to achieve this through a number of initiatives around visitor management, coastal restoration, and supporting community-led resilience projects such as the Osprey Recovery Program. This artwork by Narungga woman Violet Buckskin is a visual representation of those aims where different communities all work together to keep our coast and ocean healthy and full of life. Next slide. So conserving the osprey is important for a number of reasons. Ospreys contribute to overall biodiversity and their presence reflects a functioning, balanced coastal ecosystem. Ospreys are apex predators and so their survival is closely tied to the health of the whole coastal ecosystem. Ospreys will often inhabit areas with high biodiversity and their decline or local extinction can signal broader ecological problems such as pollution or overfishing. The Narungga people, the traditional owners of Yorke Peninsula, have sustainably lived on, fished and managed the Yorke Peninsula land and seascape for many thousands of years, and they have a deep ongoing connection to the land, sea and the animals like the osprey that call it home. Ospreys are an important part of Yorke Peninsula's natural identity, and seeing these large, distinctive, powerful birds nesting along the coast or hunting for fish is a really unique and meaningful experience for both locals and visitors. On Yorke Peninsula, many of these nesting platforms are visible from walking trails, bird hides, surf breaks or campgrounds, and their presence really enriches the experience of being in these beautiful coastal environments. The recovery program encourages local communities, schools and volunteers to become involved in conservation that builds on environmental awareness and understanding and stewardship for these raptors and respect for their habitat. Next slide. So can this program be replicated anywhere where osprey are declining? Well, the answer to that is it's quite case dependent. So when considering whether this program or an artificial nesting platform could be replicated elsewhere, it's first important to consider the cause of the population decline or lack of breeding success in a particular location or why a particular territory has been abandoned. There's a number of reasons this could be: extreme weather, pollution, disease, lack of food, or even competition with other species can all lead to a territory becoming abandoned. So in these circumstances, installing an artificial nest platform may not provide a significant benefit to the population or to a pair's breeding success. These platforms have been developed specifically for the South Australian context. In South Australia's open, low coastal landscapes, ospreys and sea eagle nests are particularly vulnerable to disturbance, especially from human approach or activity during the breeding season, and this can often occur at very long distances. In Northern Australia, taller trees and coastal forests can provide elevated nesting habitat and visual barriers, preventing such constant human disturbance. So in landscapes where that lack of cover or a lack of suitable nesting habitat exists, then a platform such as the ones manufactured in South Australia could be beneficial, so long as the other requirements of the birds were available. The community-led recovery program for ospreys in South Australia has demonstrated that community government partnerships can be incredibly beneficial for threatened species recovery, and I believe this is a model that can be applied elsewhere. If you're thinking a platform may be a good idea for your location, then the best people to speak to are Rick, Ian and myself in the first instance, and perhaps we can pop our emails in the chat so that's possible.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we send everybody who's attended today a follow-up email to connect with you either on LinkedIn or via your email.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kelly.
Excellent. Let me just stop sharing that screen there very quickly before we go to the Q&A session. And just a reminder, if you do have some questions for Ian, Rick or for Janet, please pop them into the chat facility there now. While we let Ian, Rick and Janet just have a little breather, Georgia is going to tell you about a couple of projects that Wagner's has been involved in.
So thank you very much for your presentations, Ian, Rick and Janet. We're about to dive into the Q&A session of our webinar, but just before we do, I wanted to tell you very quickly about our Osprey nest project Wagner's CFT is currently working on, and also where you can find our environmental product declaration and why it's important. Wagner's CFT is currently designing its most ambitious fibre-reinforced polymer Osprey nest platform to date, standing at an impressive 27 metres high, making it the tallest structure of its kind the business has ever undertaken. The cutting-edge platform showcases Wagner's continued innovation and leadership in composite engineering, offering a lightweight, inert solution ideal for challenging environments. The 27-metre high platform demonstrates the scalability and structural integrity of FRP materials, pushing the boundaries of what's possible in infrastructure design. Wagner's CFT also continues to work with electrical networks to minimise bird strikes on power lines. You'll see in these photos our network partners, Essential Energy, moved an Osprey nest off the live wires to a Wagner's FRP utility pole, which had been purposely installed in a nearby park. Wagner's EPD provides customers with credible environmental information about our products that has been third-party verified and is internationally recognised. Our EPD gives asset owners the tools to be able to calculate the environmental impact of a project and contribute towards reducing global warming through choosing to use products with reduced embodied carbon. If you'd like to know more, use the QR code on the screen now to download Wagner's EPD and watch the on-demand webinar on how to reduce embodied carbon and meet 2030 targets. We will also include this in the follow-up email today. I'd now like to welcome CFT's Project Manager Daniel Allen, who will be facilitating the Q&A session of the webinar today. Let's have a look at some of those questions, Daniel.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks, Kelly and Georgia. Great to see fantastic presentation there from Ian, Rick and Janet. Truly awesome to see what a small community engagement can do for future generations. So thank you. A couple of questions have been put in the chat. I'll read the first one. So it's probably directed towards you, Ian, I imagine. Has a selection of fibre reinforced polymer structure allowed you to be more flexible with where you put the platforms?
Yes, it does, most definitely. We've put these platforms in mangrove situations, which I guess the substrate's quite deep with mud. We've also put the structures on granite rock, which presents some incredible challenges in terms of how to anchor a platform in that sort of location. There are many other more expensive techniques for getting platforms into very rocky landscapes, but they're also very, very expensive and certainly without well beyond the funding arrangements, I guess, for this project. Also, the platforms can be put into shell grit, sand substrates. So, and we've done all of those effectively over the 18 platforms. So we're able to adapt them accordingly based on what sort of environment we're putting them into, and that would be very hard, I would think, to have that sort of flexibility in other materials.
Thanks, Ian. Fantastic answer. Just a follow-up question. So, Kelly, you're on mute.
I'm going to say, before we leave that, because I know this was a really interesting point that we were talking about earlier before we came online today. Sorry to jump in there, Dan. Ian, can you just tell us, when a platform doesn't perform and doesn't operate in a certain area, tell us about the flexibility of the modular style structure and the nesting platform. What does that enable you guys to do?
Well, I guess essentially there's no guarantees that Ospreys will adopt all of these platforms. That's certainly the first point, and a very important point. And we always talk to community groups in the area too that, whilst we can do everything we can to make sure that Ospreys have got the best chances of adopting them, there's no guarantee we'll see a pair come in to take it on. Now, we haven't been faced with this problem necessarily before, but we could actually pull those platforms out of the sleeves that have actually been inserted into the substrate and relocate the platform. So that was one of the design flexibilities, I guess, that we had considered. If it didn't work after perhaps 2 or 3 or 4 years and circumstances changed, then we could actually effectively easily lift them out and relocate them somewhere else.
Yeah, awesome, Ian. Good to see you have that flexibility and reuse capabilities.
Probably should mention too with that one that if we had other materials used, that wouldn't be possible. So there are single poles that have been put in that wouldn't allow that to happen. So the tower composite fibre platforms do give us that flexibility, certainly.
Just another question there, probably for you as well, Ian. How many more platforms do you think will be installed? I know you guys mentioned briefly in there you've got some upcoming, but is there more planned in the future?
We've got 2 planned over the next month or so. One at the Department of Defence Land and Conservation Park just south of Port Wakefield, and another one on the Point Pierce Aboriginal community near Port Victoria. One of those platforms has certainly been quite challenging. We've got a different rock substrate there that we're trying to work around how we get that one installed, but there's good community support for providing that sort of technology to overcome those obstacles. That will give us 20 platforms around the coast in South Australia, and we'd be thinking that probably it would be a good time to take stock of what we've achieved and look at what we need to put in the future and where those gaps, I guess, for osprey breeding need to be. So we've probably done the critical phase of the project now, and the next phase, I guess, would be looking at those gaps in the population and their habitats.
Terrific. There's another question there in the chat. Who came up with the design of the raised platforms? I know that Rick mentioned Kent had some fairly dramatic impact in that sector, but it's interesting who came up with the form design.
Yeah, an important one too. And again, it was a case of the Southern Yorke Peninsula Landcare group kicked off the planning process for this project. And I guess the first thing that we did was undertake an investigation of what sort of design of platforms exist in other countries, particularly Europe, England, America. And there's no strict design requirements for osprey platforms. In other countries, a whole range of materials are used. The platforms are put into different habitats. But also the population over in some of those countries are also quite common. So there's a fair demand, I guess, for nesting locations, and ospreys would tend to adopt those more rudimentary platforms a bit easier. And again, through the Southern Yorke Peninsula Landcare Group project, we're able to bring all those designs into one place, look at the South Australian landscape, what the causes, I guess, of the decline were, particularly predation, disturbance, and then adapt those platform designs to the South Australian situation. So that's really how we come to get together to provide, I guess, a series of specifications for the platform. And then, of course, we gave all these specifications and ideas to an engineer, and then, of course, they put that together into a solid engineered platform design with proper specifications for them. And I should mention too that because of the fairly strict conditions in which these the platforms have been designed, the Department for Environment and Water in South Australia underwrite all these platforms. So effectively, they take ownership and responsibility for these platforms in this location. So we know they're fit for purpose. We know they've been designed appropriately, and all the safety requirements are, of course, are pulled into this as well. So if that all makes sense.
Definitely does. Yeah, thanks, Ian. We've got a follow-up question there. How much does it cost to construct and install a raised platform? I imagine that'd have to be a bit generic because there's so many different adaptabilities and types, but just generic answer there, Ian.
That's a pretty broad question, and it really depends on the location that we're putting them into. As I mentioned, we've got platforms that we bolt to granite rock. That's a pretty specialised technique to make sure that the platforms stay where they're put and that they don't fall over. Bear in mind that a lot of those locations, they're subjected to extreme weather conditions, huge tidal surges, wave action effectively that can cause some damage to these platforms if they're not put in appropriately. But all the platforms that we've put in, as I mentioned before, have got design specifications for them, and all of them have remained intact in those locations. In terms of the cost, on average, around about $5,000 to $6,000 for the materials for each platform, and the men's shed at Ardrossan that Rick talked about, they largely do that in kind as volunteers, but we do have to pay for materials that's incurred for them. So generally, the platforms themselves are quite cheap, and certainly much cheaper than other materials that we were investigating at the beginning of this project. The installation is another situation. We do use helicopters to lift them into position in remote areas. We also use barges with cranes on them, and to do that as well. So the price variations there is quite variable, but generally the price of the platforms themselves around $5,000 to $6,000 on average.
Thank you. So great to see the involvement and the lessons learned. I'm sure you guys have taken out from the first one. I think it was a pallet, you said, Rick, that was used initially in the mangrove tree. So yeah, huge lessons learned, obviously, from your team going into that. We have another question there that I might direct to Rick, if that's okay. How long do you anticipate the structures that you have put in will serve the ospreys? And can you explain why it's important to annual breeding cycles that these structures have a long life?
Well, might be more appropriate for Ian to perhaps answer that. That's more in his area of expertise. Can I handball that one to you, Ian?
Thanks for that, Rick. So the longevity of the platforms, that was the first question.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about this at length with the engineers that developed the specifications, and in reality, the engineers have designed them in a way that they should be fit for purpose for at least 25 years. But in reality, they indicated that they may last much longer than that. So 25 years is a long time. Ospreys, the life or the breeding lifespan of an osprey is probably around 20 years. And that doesn't necessarily mean that when a pair drops off that another pair doesn't take over a platform. That's usually what happens. But some of these breeding territories have been in place for well over a century. So I think 25 years is a pretty good outcome for at least to have those in place as secure as they may be.
Have you seen a changeover, Ian? Just a follow-up to kind of what you were saying there. Have you seen a changeover from when a breeding pair finishes up their cycle and then someone takes a new artificial nest, or?
Yeah, it would be a natural process. I mean, certainly the mortality rates of ospreys is fairly high at times, and if one of the pair passes on or is subjected to a mortality, there's enough floating birds around in the population that would come in and match up with that lone bird that's still in that territory, or even if worst case scenario that both of the birds were to die or be subjected to a mortality, then it would be pretty certain that within a year or two another pair would adopt that platform as well. So once the territory's been established, it's pretty hard to break that cycle, I guess, with ospreys, given that they're really entrenched to a breeding territory, and unless there's something pretty dramatic like a major development built close to that platform, then I can see no reason why they wouldn't continue for many, many years after the platform's been installed.
Might be worthwhile, Ian, perhaps mentioning about your satellite tracking at this stage and to see how the birds spread to different areas.
Yeah, good point, Rick. The satellite tracking has been very revealing in terms of giving a perspective of not only the mortality rates of the ospreys, what causes their mortalities, where they move to, and particularly the shifting of the population around the coast of South Australia. We've certainly seen that the mortality of females appears to be much higher than males. Out of all the mortalities we've received so far, most of them are actually females, and they do these quite long marathon trips. Males tend to be very sedentary. They stick to their breeding territory, or where they've been bred. They seem to stick to those territories fairly closely. So we've still got more to learn, but it's certainly giving a fantastic insight into what the population's doing and where they're moving to, and I guess the critical habitats that tend to keep them in an area. And without doubt, where we've got platforms at the moment, have turned out to, at least in terms of the satellite tracking, show that these birds really do rely on those areas both for safety, food resources, and foraging opportunities.
Yeah, awesome, Ian. It's good to hear technology and engineering can have a positive impact instead of a negative one. So yeah, great to hear. I think that's all we've got there, Kelly.
I think that's all the questions. Yeah. Thank you so much for absolutely. And, thank you so much to Ian, Rick and Janet for coming today and presenting this amazing project, which is a real testament to the community and government agencies all working together to effect change in South Australia there. So thank you very much for that. I'm just going to quickly share my screen here as we are coming to the end of our webinar. If you would like to share your thoughts on today's webinar, please feel free to complete the feedback form by using the QR code that's on the screen there now. I've also just put the link to that feedback form in the chat if you would like to fill out that form. On that form, there's also an opportunity. If you want to be a guest speaker, if you've got a great project that you'd love to share with us, fill out the form or reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me an email, give me a call, however you would like to contact me. I'd love to hear from you. Really quickly, coming up in June, we'll be discovering how nearshore coastal hydrodynamics and wave behaviour influence the design of shoreline structures with Magrin and Associates, Technical Director and Senior Engineer Will Souter and Coastal Scientist Freya Barr. So if you're interested in attending that webinar, just use the QR code on the screen now to register for your free online seat or to receive a recorded copy of the webinar. I'll also make sure I send that link out in the follow-up chat today. So that concludes our webinar. Thanks very much for coming. We're going to go out on that amazing video of the raised osprey nests being installed in South Australia that we came in on. So enjoy, and we look forward to seeing you next time.